The nature of the superhero genre itself welcomes some pretty bizarre and unorthodox stories. Sometimes these storylines fall into obscurity because they're too out there, but other times they're so weird that they actually work. Here are 10 of those stories that I think actually worked despite how weird they were. At number 10, we have the Korvac Saga. This one is weird in that it's very confusing and sort of bites off more than it can chew. When Michael Korvac comes to the present day, he gains immense power from Galactus' ship and comes to Earth with basically god status. Where he comes from is the confusing part because he claims to have fought the original Guardians of the Galaxy in the year 3000, which gets explained but seems very bizarre considering that's in the future and there is indeed a present day Guardians of the Galaxy who actually end up fighting Korvac during this conflict. The Avengers then join them in the battle and, well, they all end up getting killed by the godlike villain Michael Korvac. But in a state of grief, Korvac decides to resurrect all the heroes and then kill himself, which is really unexpected and pretty weird. It's a bit of a mind trip, but ultimately ties up as a pretty epic storyline that actually stands the test of time in many ways. At number 9 is the Serpent Crown. This storyline is something that has kind of gone down as an iconic story, but at the time might have been seen as a big risk by writers and readers alike. Partly because it marks the first and last time a cowboy named the Two-Gun Kid was part of the Avengers, and partly because it pits the Avengers against the Squadron Sinister, which is basically Marvel's knockoff Justice League. While Kang the Conqueror is searching for the Serpent Crown, he sends the Avengers into an alternate dimension where they have to fight the likes of Hyperion, Nighthawk, Power Princess, Speed Demon, and Dr. Spectrum. Although these characters had already made an appearance by this time, this is one of their bigger features, and anyone would agree that a Justice League knockoff in the world of Marvel seems like a bad idea on paper. But quite to the contrary, a few of the members of Squadron Sinister end up sticking around, like Nighthawk and Hyperion, the latter of which later becomes a member of the Avengers himself. At number 8 is Shadowland. This storyline is one that has been criticized mainly due to the notion that it shows Daredevil doing some pretty bad stuff, which is unlike him. In this storyline, Daredevil basically goes on a power trip and decides that to take down the underground crime ring, The Hand, he has to actually join them. And not only join them, lead them. But after he's possessed by a demonic beast that The Hand worships, he becomes more evil than anticipated, opening a massive prison and tossing basically everyone in it. Basically, the story of Shadowland shows how other heroes are forced to confront Daredevil in his newfound villainy and attempt to bring him back to his senses. The Avengers take on this task and send in the likes of Luke Cage, Moon Knight, Ghost Rider, Spider-Man, and Elektra, among others, to try and put a stop to his madness. And although it does seem like a bit of an oddly motivated plot, it has become somewhat iconic just because of the sheer mayhem that ensues when all of these notable forces clash. At number 7 is New Avengers Illuminati. This is originally known as a one-off storyline, but it's become known as the origin to how the now popular Illuminati were formed in the context of Marvel. And it's still a surprise to most readers that it ended up actually working, mainly because it features so many heavy hitters that it's hard to imagine how they'd all cooperate with one another. Originally formed to feature all the smartest minds in Marvel, the Illuminati also seemed like a weird move to add yet another superhero team to Marvel's roster, with Iron Man, Mr. Fantastic, Professor X, Black Panther, Black Bolt, Doctor Strange, Namor, and Yellow Jacket. It's hard to imagine that this group actually gelled and didn't get written off as too overpowered. But it's actually become one of the cult favorite superhero groups in all of Marvel and DC Comics, which is fun to see because otherwise these characters don't really have much business appearing in the same storyline, let alone the same room as one another. At number 6, we have Superman Red Sun. This storyline is a weird one in that it tells the story of Superman being a Soviet hero, with his ship having crash landed in Soviet Ukraine rather than Kansas. With Lex Luthor being the president of the United States and Superman's childhood love being replaced by a Soviet party member named Lana Lazarenko, it initially appears to just be a story of what-ifs set in the Cold War era. Superman finds himself at the helm of the US-Russia conflict with President Luthor, which escalates in a similar fashion to the actual events of the Cold War. On top of all this, we also see an anti-revolutionary Batman trying to avenge his parents' death at the hand of the secret police, which which all just seems super bizarre and convoluted at first. But what ends up making this storyline stand out as one of the more iconic and celebrated DC storylines is how it offers commentary to real international conflicts in the modern world. Published in 2005, it doesn't quite speak to these issues as they are today, but it does remind us how complicated and long-winded the tensions between the East and the West have been. At number 5 is Batman: The Return of Bruce Wayne. This storyline is a really fun one and is only weird because of how unusual the adventure is for Bruce Wayne. The story starts after the events of Final Crisis when Batman is zapped by Darkseid's Omega beams and sent back to the Paleolithic era, aka the Stone Age. He then has to fight his way through every different epoch of human history until he gets to the present, influencing the world around him as he goes. For example, he inadvertently starts a bat-worshipping cult in the Stone Age, which he then finds artifacts of during his time fighting Blackbeard in the 18th century. The Grant Morrison story really adds a lot to the mythology of Batman as well, and much of it has become canon, like Batman's 17th century ancestor Nathaniel Wayne. The story itself could be considered pretty strange, seeing as it begins in a caveman setting, but the depth of the adventure and the place it ends up really makes this weird story actually work really well. At number 4, we have Vision Volume 2. Released in 2015, this storyline explores the story of Vision trying to find purpose in life through the pursuit of a nuclear family. With a wife and 2 kids, they become the android family on the block and for the most part deal with pretty mundane human problems. At least at first. When this first came out, it may have struck readers as being a little too strange to actually work, but there is more depth to this 12-part maxi series than was first expected of it. In choosing to create his own family, Vision seems to be adjusting the protocol instilled in him by his creator Ultron. Instead of pursuing something of a set purpose, like Ultron's proposition of cleansing the Earth of humanity, Vision wants to set off on a pursuit of the unobtainable, which he deems to be the essence of freedom. And in the case of this series, that unattainable goal seems to be the American dream. This series ended up being so influential that it's one of the main inspirations for the hit Disney Plus series WandaVision. At number 3 is House of X and the Powers of X. This storyline chronicles the events of X-Men creating their own nation-state on an island called Krakoa. This utopian society is meant to be only inhabited by mutants and is led by Professor X, Magneto, and Apocalypse. Not only does this island allow mutants to live beyond the controlling grips of humanity, but it also allows them to come back to life upon death, thanks to a group of mutants known as the Five. After a long drawn-out conflict with the humans, Krakoa becomes more of a haven for mutants than anyone could have hoped for, unless you're the governments of the world, because of course, conflict still follows the mutants to the island in the form of a looming war between man-made Sentinels and the X-Men. And though readers may have been thinking an island inhabited by mutants might have had its issues plot-wise, it's actually become one of the most iconic X-Men stories in all of Marvel, and is discussed online as being one of the more feasible ways for Marvel to integrate the X-Men into the MCU, whether they go with it or not. At number 2, we have Superior Spider-Man. This storyline really is a long shot. For those who aren't aware, Superior Spider-Man is the version of Spider-Man that's taken on by Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, at least at first. In a massive twist of fate, Doc Ock actually takes over for Peter Parker after his death, and the result is a more advanced version of the hero with retractable arms and a plethora of new gadgets. What's even weirder though is that Doc Ock's mind has been transferred to Peter Parker's body, meaning that he doesn't actually appear as himself when out of the costume. This first takes place in Amazing Spider-Man number 697 and eventually veers into another comic series called Avenging Spider-Man, where Otto continues his run as the web slinger. It's a pretty insane idea to try something like this, but it's actually yielded a really cool version of Spider-Man and even shows us another side to Doc Ock that we surely wouldn't have been introduced to otherwise. Finally, at number 1, we have Watchmen. This now insanely popular comic book series wasn't meant to be a massive success. It started as a 12-part maxi series in 1986, set in an alternate true reality where Nixon is president and New York City is the setting instead of a Gotham or a Metropolis. Except the one catch is that in our world, superheroes are real, with only one of them, Dr. Manhattan, actually having real superpowers. It's a real look at what the world would be like if certain people decided to take on the violent lifestyle of being a vigilante in modern day America. And the result is clearly something that people were interested in. But of course, like anything, it wasn't expected to be quite as big of a hit as it was. The characters were originally going to be pulled from old comics by the discontinued Charlton Comics, giving new life to a group of obscure heroes, but due to copyright issues and other bureaucratic complications, writer Alan Moore and illustrator Dave Gibbons were forced to develop their own characters from scratch, which could have led to the series being a total failure since this adds a lot of extra work and new names might have curbed the interest of diehard DC fans. But it's good that they did it, because in the end, we got Watchmen. Alright, that was the list. Make sure to comment below with any other weird storylines that you think ended up being worth a read. And as always, I will do my best to reply to you on my personal channel. Thanks for tuning in to Top 10 Nerd. I've been your host, Ben Ball. You know the rest. Take it easy.